Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link in association with the ACCA. So today we're looking at how to crack the 7 relationships vital to a shared services organisation's success. So my name is Susie West, and I'm very pleased to have with me Jamie Lyon from the ACCA, who is the head of corporate there. So welcome, Jamie.
Thanks very much, Susie. Delighted to be here.
So for those of you that aren't aware, my name is Susie West, and I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link. And we've been working with Jamie Lyon at the ACCA on a number of initiatives. So delighted to be working in collaboration on this particular webinar today. Of course, you do have a role to play, which is to make sure that you provide your questions to us nice and early. And there's something that compelled you to come on to this webinar, so do make sure that that reason is well and truly satisfied, and make sure that you post your question through to me and Jamie, and you can see the little red box that's marked there, and we'll take your questions in the last 10 minutes of the webinar, so make sure you stay on for that. But please do make sure you get the most out of this session, because it's a very important 60 minutes of your life that we hope will be a good return for you. So in terms of the agenda today, we're going to be touching on the context of why we're actually having this discussion, and then looking into the 7 relationships, and then closing with a summary, and then questions. So in terms of the context, there have been a number of developments that have been taking place within the shared services, outsourcing and GBS market over the last, I would say in particular, over the last kind of 12 to 24 months. And I think really what that has done is meant that we have, as people in this market, been zeroing in on a slight change that's taken place. And what do I mean by that? I mean, one of the developments that has been taking place recently is that there's much more of a focus on service delivery as an output of the shared services model. And I would actually say that that's now an equal imperative to cost. And when you asked the shared services director maybe 5 or so years ago what the imperative was there, and the kind of the key consequence of shared services, they would have told you that the top 3 reasons are cost, cost, cost. And I think probably a lot of shared services probably suffered, that the service element suffered a little bit because of that focus. And now what we're finding is that there's much more focus on service delivery, and really costs becoming a natural kind of output of that kind of mentality. So that's having a key kind of impact on the way that people look at relationships. And obviously we're going to be building on that later. There's also a keener focus on moving up the value chain for shared services organisations, and moving away from what you could describe as a commodity-based shared services structure, which was really routinely looking at the transactional activities. And now it's much more how can the shared services organisation be better aligned with the business and serve the business more. And that means having to build relationships with the business in order to be the kind of the best and most suitable partner for that business. And again, this is very much based on relationship building. I'm going to hand over to Jamie for points 3 and 4.
Thank you, Susie. Well, I think sort of everyone's very familiar in this space with the emergence of GBS, or Global Business Services, so it would be remiss of us not to talk about GBS in the context of the importance of relationships. And let me just start by defining what I mean by GBS. I think we are more familiar with organisations that are looking at cross-functional service delivery, so bringing together those different functional shared service operations under one management team, one functional leader, one governance structure, and also, of course, aligning those responsibilities typically around what we call end-to-end processes, which usually cross those different functions. So there's definitely a sort of new kid on the block in that respect, and I guess. Absolutely, GBS is about, of course, getting more costs out of the system. It is about process excellence. It is about more transparency. It's about more control. It's about better risk management, and all those sort of great things that we've sort of associated with functional shared services. But I think where it's slightly different is that obviously GBS is also even more, I guess, around business alignment. So it is around flexibility, it is about scalability to support the organisation's strategy. And of course, increasingly, I guess it's positioned around providing sort of insights that are really going to drive commercial success. So this notion of alignment of GBS to truly supporting the business, I think, is really important. And that, for me, gives greater prominence to the importance of effective relationships. I guess the other thing that I'd say is definitionally, GBS is about bringing different functions together. So you've essentially got potentially finance guys sitting with HR guys and so on. So that idea of sort of cross-functional working is pretty important. I'll just reiterate that. The idea of cross-functional working is very important. So GBS definitely has to be on our radar for this discussion. The fourth point really, I think, is, for me, the big point, and it's around the fact that we all know that the transformation is it's difficult and it's a complex process. And if I think about, the reality is that different businesses go through that transformation process differently, and change happens in different ways. Often we see lots of change happening at once. There's typically a change in control as well. So, this whole thing around change management and the impact on people and relationships is absolutely central. It's quite ironic, we talk about people and relationships as the soft stuff in business, but actually it's sort of the hardest stuff to do. So I think this focus around relationships is absolutely, and people particularly, is fundamental to transformation success. So again, it's good to talk about it in that context.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jamie. I think it's important to note that this particular webinar is very much from the perspective of a shared services leader. So that's really where we've been kind of seeing the relationships fanning out from. Just before we go into the 7 relationships, we're just going to run our one and only poll question for the day. So coming up on your screen, please. Where are you in your shared services journey today? Are you in the evaluation stage, the design stage, the startup and implementation stage? Are you in the stabilization and continuous improvement stage? Or are you in the stage where you would say that you're moving to global business services? So we like to get this percentage up nice and high. We're only at 16% of you responding. So we try and get it north of 70%, so we've got a way to go. So if you haven't already responded, please do so. And I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Closing the poll. Just under 60% there. Oh, just over 60%, which is rather exciting. Okay, coming up on your screen now. Let's have a look at the maturity of the attendees on this webinar today. So you've got just shy of 40% within the stabilization and continuous improvement phase. So looking at those numbers then, 60% of you are in stabilization, continuous improvement, moving to GBS. So you could say that we have a fairly mature representation on this webinar today. Maybe suggests that a lot of you have been running shared services for maybe 4 to 10, maybe more than that in terms of years. And 18% of you in the evaluation stage, so this will be very useful for you, 5% in design, 16% in the startup and implementation. Right, let's have a look at the first relationship, which is the relationship which probably won't come as a surprise to you with the customer. So just so that you're clear in terms of who we mean as far as the customer is concerned, we are talking about the business, the internal business. And let's have a look at some of the kind of key considerations and questions to ask as far as looking at your relationship with the customer. So the key one is, of course, is who is the customer within your organization and how do you differentiate them from the user? And most shared services organizations will say that the customer is the person that pays the bill. And there it might be the CFO of Spain or the CFO of France, it might be a managing director of a particular business in one of those geographies, it might be the senior leadership team, it might be the CFO at group level. But whoever it is you're actually kind of working with and they actually pay the bill. And importantly, do they actually know that, that they are the customer? Do they understand that there is this dynamic between you and them, which is based on collaboration and partnership, but it is a customer-based relationship, and they are the customer. You are there to make sure that they are more successful. Really importantly, what's important to your customer, and it will change, because bearing in mind you might have 20 or 40 customers. They'll all have different needs and different priorities based on where they are in their own maturity cycle and where they are in their own businesses. And it's really important for you to find out what's important for them in the next kind of 6 to 12 months and what they're looking for from you. And that leads me into point number 4. Where do they want to be in 6 months, 12 months? And how are you going to make sure that they get there a little bit quicker and a little bit more elegantly? And a lot of this is about asking questions and understanding the needs from your customers. Looking at point number 5, what does satisfaction actually look like to them? Because I'm assuming that everyone on the line actually wants to have a satisfied customer, but the term satisfaction is actually quite loose. Satisfied to one person means something very different to another person. So what does satisfaction look like to you, but more importantly to your customer? And it will change customer to customer, so bear that in mind. What does your customer expect from you? It's really good getting clarity around that. It means that you're pointing in the same direction. And understanding where you are today versus where you want to be in the future, i.e. ideally a perfect relationship, what does that gap look like, and what does the plan look like in order to kind of close that gap? And finally, how do they perceive you? And that's really important, just getting a very kind of clear commentary on how they perceive you. Do they perceive you as somebody that they want to partner with? Do they perceive you as a part of the organisation they don't want to be associated with? What is their perception of you, and is that a perception that sits comfortably with you? So all these questions are obviously good considerations to be asking when looking specifically at the customer. Now let's look at some of the tips that can help you in this particular area. So as far as finding out all of this information, it is of course the best model, I believe, is just by sitting down with them and asking them a lot of questions and illustrating that you are listening to their responses. And it's very key at this time not to kind of start offering a solution as such, but just go through the practice of listening and to try and avoid feeling at any point that you're being attacked, because that obviously brings out defensive behaviour, but literally just going into kind of over-listening mode. And then following up on that meeting to illustrate really clearly that their needs will be acted on. So to give them a sense that they are in safe hands and that you can be trusted and that this is going to be a very positive collaboration. And involving them in development so that they are absolutely educated on the process. And I think this is key, and this is a key part of the word which I always seem to keep coming back to when it comes to shared services, which is engagement. So if you involve them in the development so that they're educated in the process, they will be more engaged, they'll be more sympathetic when anything goes wrong, and they'll feel that they can go and champion you in the organisation a bit more credibly as well. Ask them how they wish to be liaised with, and that comes down to the kind of format. Is it face-to-face? Is it by email? Is it on their mobile? What is it? And the frequency of that. And also just bringing them into the shared services organisation so that they are very aware of its role and its purpose and how the thing works, and that they realise that it's a group of people who only have the best interests of the business at mind. And obviously bringing them in to meet the leadership team at the shared services organisation to get them engaged in what the vision is, assuming that your vision is to support the company to be more successful, then they will absolutely buy into that vision and get excited about the shared services direction. And once you've done all of this, then what you're going to have is a shared services champion on board who is going to go out and help kind of spread the message of shared services. But do ask them to be a champion, and do let them know what you expect a champion to be looking like. So let's move on to relationship number 2, which is the user. And again, let's start off with some of the key questions that you need to be asking when looking at this particular relationship. So who are the users, of course, and building up a kind of a profile of that, and understanding who your super users are and what kind of relationship you want with them, what are you expecting from your super users, and who are the key influencers. there'll be key influencers in the organisation who will have a kind of a stronger voice. So you want to make sure that you've got them on side because people listen to them. So identify who the influencers are. Moving down to point number 5, actually point number 4, let's talk about what the ideal interaction looks like between the user and the shared services organisation. So just be cognizant of that. And again, it's a kind of communication type that you're looking at there. And what are they expecting to get from the shared services organisation on a day-to-day basis, on a more strategic basis? Being sensitive to their culture and context will really help you in your relationship with them. When we're talking about culture, we're obviously talking about different geographical cultures and also different cultures that stem from mergers and acquisitions. As far as context is concerned, it's context not just from a business perspective, but it can be at a team level and it can also be at a personal level. So just being sensitive to as much of that as you can. And also, how can the shared services support them in the most kind of viable way? And who should own this support? So do you have, for each of your kind of user groups, do each of those actually have an owner that kind of looks out for them and account manages them essentially? How educated are the users of you and your service and your role, and what does it actually mean to them on a personal basis, and how educated are they of that? And also really importantly, how are you managing this relationship and measuring the relationship? So what are your choices as far as that is concerned? So now let's have a look at some of the tips. It's really important for you just to map out the different types of users that you've got because there'll be different treatment based on the different types and understanding that no user is the same. So individual relationships will absolutely differ. Type to type or group to group and also user to user. So again, be sensitive to that. Know who your super users are, spend generous amounts of time with them because they're going out and spreading the word. And make sure that you do get your feedback from your users and have a systematic process in place so that they can see that the feedback that they're giving you is not only being heard, but it's also being acted on, and that there is a proper, robust system in place dealing with their feedback. Otherwise, in the future, they may well not bother, and they might become quite apathetic about the relationship. And identify who your ambassadors are, and these are your kind of key influencers. So let's have a look at the suppliers and some of the key relationships, the key considerations to be looking at when you're looking at your suppliers are the following. So what is your current relationship with your suppliers? And what we mean largely by that is how would suppliers perceive you? Would they perceive you as squeezing them or for the best price? Would they perceive you as being very fair and looking out for them as a business? So looking at what your current relationship is like with your suppliers is key, and that really comes down to the culture. How integral are they to your business? Which ones are really strategic and integral, and how do you liaise with them? Who is actually advising you on the nature of your relationship? Is it somebody within procurement? And who owns that relationship? And does the supplier indeed know that there is a relationship here and it is owned, it is something that you care about, it's something that you report on, and it's something that you're looking to improve? Are you engaging them in the improvement of that relationship? It's important to also be very aware of the programs that are coming up over the next 12 months which will affect the suppliers, and you need your suppliers on board for particular programs in order for the programs to be successful. We can be talking about PCAR programs, and we can be talking about electronic invoicing, we can be talking about changing of mail from a business unit to a shared services organisation. So think about all the programs that you've got coming up over the next 12 months and how you're actually going to be working with your suppliers on this. And what do they need to do? What do the suppliers need to do in order to help you be successful? And these are, again, just very useful questions to be asking yourself regarding your suppliers. So having a look at some of the tips for improvement, looking at your suppliers. I mean, one of the first things I would do if you haven't already, though I think probably a lot of you have, is to obviously look at your supplier base and have a look and see how much has been spent with them in the last 12 months, who has been very much non-active or inactive for the last 12 months, 24 months? Are you going through some kind of consolidation program where you can start channeling spend through a reduced number of suppliers? And if so, what's your process looking like around that? So analysing spend and volume, working with procurement on tendering processes, and making sure that the results of the tendering process are carried through and not undermined. For example, once your preferred suppliers are in place, there is no maverick spend taking place within the organisation, which is a horrible way of undermining all the good work that sourcing has done. I think it's really important to let your suppliers know what a successful partnership means to you, and articulating that so they're very, very clear about that. A lot of your suppliers won't have an idea, they won't have a clue as to what a successful partnership looks like. But they might have an idea when they're at the contract stage, but 6 months on, 12 months on, they might not. And suppliers might only ask the question, what does a successful partnership mean to you when it comes to contract renewal? But I think always kind of keeping them on top of what a successful partnership looks like is key. It's good for you to know what's important to them. For the smaller suppliers, it does tend to be cash flow, and for the larger suppliers who tend to be a bit more cash rich, it might be something else. So just find out what's important and see if you can work that a little bit to your advantage as well. Who are the early adopters? That's key for you to know, because when you're rolling out your programs, it's good to go and work with the early adopters first so you can announce some key successes, not just internally but also to other suppliers as well, and put real momentum behind your programs. Get familiar with the touch points that exist day to day with your suppliers. You do want to make sure that if you're kind of clear on a specific relationship type with a supplier, you want to make sure that all the touch points within your organisation are reflecting that same message and that same culture. So from the person that procures from them, the person that books in a goods receipt note, whoever it is, whatever the touch points, make sure it's very much a kind of a cohesive kind of style of approach that again fits in with the relationship that you want with the supplier. So moving on, we're looking now at the relationship that you have with your partners, and what we're talking about here is these are partners who help you be more successful. So these might be an outsourcing partner, they might be a consulting partner, they might be a technology partner. And I'm not going to be reading all of these, but just kind of zeroing in on some of them. I think it's very important for your partners to know from the outset, but then continuously be reminded what your mission is. And what you're actually looking for from your solution providers, your partners, in order to get there. I think they need to know from the outset, but they need to have continuous reviews on that as well. And also, do they know that they're key partners? They might behave differently if they do know that they are key partners. And really being clear on what a perfect partnership looks like, how does a key partner behave, and again articulating that, because one person's view of a perfect partnership might be different from another person's view. So articulating that really does help be very kind of clear on this. What's the nature of the relationship? Is it fear or incentive based? And again, this will come back to your culture and how you'll want to be working with your partners. Obviously, it's much more encouraging and better in the long term if it's a bit more incentive based than fear based, but just being aware that you've got these levers that you can be pulling on. Also, moving down to number 8, who is best placed to lead the relationship? Because each of these partners will need to have an owner internally who's actually responsible for that relationship. And I think it's really important that that person is selected right from the beginning and knows, obviously, that they are the owner of that relationship. And what's your review process? So have you got it stipulated so it's just around contract stage and renewal stage, or have you got something where it's every month or every 6 months? Just know what your review process is. Be clear about what the agenda looks like at that review process and what the intended outcome is, and make sure that it happens religiously and it's not something that slips, and it will keep your partner very much kind of involved in what your intentions are. And finally, on point number 11, how do you facilitate knowledge transfer? And I think this is particular with outsourcers who really, they need to be so embedded in your culture and in your intention, and making sure that all the knowledge that's being garnered over the last 10, 20, 30 years is elegantly transferred over to them as an organisation. So again, I think we all know that that's something that needs huge consideration when looking at relationships with BPO partners. So as far as tips are concerned, let's just tease out some of these. Know what each of the partners has promised, and if you're coming in a little bit late in the day, or even if you just need a reminder, go back to the commercial agreement and remind yourself on what was promised, see how on or off target they are, and make sure it's all documented. It will keep your partners honest, and they'll make sure that they want to deliver what's in the commercial contract. But then sometimes the commercials are arranged and then it's put in a drawer and it's not referred to again. Keep referring back to it, and make sure that the partners know that you're wanting to keep referring back to it. We talked about each partner having an owner, and also ask your partner during the tendering process, how will you in the shared services organisation get the most out of them? You want to make sure that they excel. You want to make sure that you are getting the most out of them, and also that the partner is performing for you kind of better, more effectively, with a keener focus than they are reporting and working with another customer. You want to be their favourite customer, you want to be their #1 customer, you want to be their priority customer. So how can you make sure that that is the case? And often they might say, we need you to be available and responsive to the partnership so that it can flourish. So if they ask for that, make sure that you are available and responsive. Just moving down to the final bullet, ask the question, how many accounts is my account manager within the partner working on? And ask that question, I should actually, before you move into contract, and then keep asking it when you're in delivery. And if at any point you're feeling that your account manager is strained or has got too much going on, then make sure that they are sticking to the number that they talked about pre-contract. And you might even want that written into the contract. But what you don't want is a resource-thin account manager working with you. Your partners will nearly always have their best practices, and this will nearly always be documented. So make sure that you have them to hand and follow them as much as you can, because they've been through this enough to know what the best practices look like. And actually, there's just one other point that I want to dwell on, and this is to meet your account manager pre-contract and lock them in if you can. And this is really important because your relationship with them will be through the account manager. So making sure that you've met them pre-contract, that you like them, there's a chemistry, you would recruit them if given half the chance, and you want them on board because you think it's going to work with them on board. If that's the case, then lock them into the contract and make sure that that's something that you absolutely can do. Moving on to relationship number 5, we're looking here at the functions. So the questions, again, questions and considerations to ask yourself. What do the functions need to do in order for the shared services to be successful? And this is largely around process compliancy and behaviour. So what do they need to do on a day-to-day basis to make sure that you can be super successful? And obviously being aware of how much they're doing that today is key. And what do you need to do as a shared services organisation to help your functions be more successful? And that's really when you're kind of digging into what a really successful collaboration looks like. And that takes us on to what does success actually look like for them. And then again, doing a workshop around articulating what success looks like for the function, for the relationship is really, really key. Understanding how is the function motivated today will help you get the most out of them, because they will have goals and KPIs and they will be bonused, so it affects their own lifestyle and their income. Be aware of what they all are, because if you want them to be helping you in a particular way and yet their KPIs are helping them in another way, then you're going to be slightly at cross purposes when you ask the function to help you out. Okay, let's move on to some tips in regards to the functions. So it's a good idea to obviously spend as much time as you can with functional leads and the influencers, again, to understand what their goals are, where they want to be in 6 months' time, what's a key priority for them, what does success look like, what are their key problems right now that they are stopping them from being successful, and what are they expecting from and seeking from the shared services organisation. So that's a big conversation. These kind of big conversations with the customers, the users, the functions. We're talking about a good chunk of time spent with these individuals, and it's quite consultative and best done within a workshop environment. Does their perception of you as the shared services organisation, the shared services leader, does it serve you? And if not, ask them how this might change and what you can do to help that perception to change at all, because you want that perception of you to be positive, and sometimes it's not, sometimes it's negative. So ask them what the perception is. Running education roadshows on cause and effects will also help you. And what I mean by this is that often we see in the world of shared services that a lot of the problems in the shared services actually stem from a functional part of the organisation. It can happen in procurement. So something that's happening in AP is actually caused by a lack of compliance in procurement. So running educational roadshows on cause and effect and how functional behaviours upstream, i.e. procurement, can affect downstream, i.e. accounts payable results, is very educational, and it will absolutely help you in the long term. It might seem quite arduous and resource heavy, but it will absolutely serve you. And document data so that you can report on the improvements within the functions, and run league tables. So run league tables for the functions according to how compliant they are, and make those league tables public, and publish those league tables on a monthly basis, and make them wholly visible so everybody can see that their own kind of performance is being published to the C-suite, and everybody can see how they're performing and helping you as a shared services organisation be more successful. Okay, now I'd like to hand over to Jamie, who's going to cover off points 6 and 7. Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Susie. Well, I guess sort of, when we think about the components of shared service success, there's absolutely no doubt that the quality of the leadership team is absolutely essential, really. And I think, sort of from my perspective, that's not just about ensuring operational delivery. Of course, that's important, but we're all familiar with this idea of meeting your SLAs and it being pretty much green across the board, but actually underneath there's a lot of noise in the system. And for me, the role of the leadership team here is not about just making sure they do deliver operationally. It is about making sure that they try and put shared services on an equal footing with the rest of the business. It is shared services, but that doesn't mean it's subservient. And I think there's something around making sure the vision, the tone, the culture of shared services is right for the organisation. I think sort of developing a team that has that reflects those relationships and has that capability is really important. You want a team that's engaged, that's motivated, and ultimately is capable of leading shared services to do what it needs to do. I think sort of the other reasons really why the senior team is obviously important is that they're typically the face to senior executives and the rest of the business. And of course they act as role models for the rest of the team in shared services. So it's an important team that you need to nurture and look after very carefully. I'd say in terms of sort of the sort of considerations when formulating a team or thinking how you develop it, certainly is this piece around what I call the talent equation, or the talent and capability equation. So really, what sort of what's your bandwidth in terms of your management capabilities, your operational capabilities, your leadership capabilities, your behavioural capabilities. Who's bringing what to the table in terms of the top team? Where are the gaps? How can you fill them? What's the risk? If someone importantly, if there's a critical role within the leadership team and they're all critical, what is the risk if you lose those people? What is the risk in terms of loss of tacit knowledge? So always be mindful of what your performance capability is in terms of the leadership team and where the risks are, I think is critical. And also linked to that, I think thinking about who's on the radar. So when you look at the level below, when you look, if you like, at senior positions in the rest of the team just below the leadership level, who are the people who you think could step up? I think it's always very useful to have a view on that. And I think there are other points that I just sort of bring out. So, to what extent, I mean, we talked about alignment before with the rest of the business. So, for me, a fundamental question is, how much do the shared service leadership team really understand the business, and what's the quality of the relationships that they have? Because that's obviously fundamental to, as I said before, putting the shared service operation on an equal footing with the rest of the organisation, retained business. And I guess from a personal perspective, you've got to think about what are the career opportunities to them if they've got to the top within the shared service environment. What is what's next for them? Because they'll obviously be interested in sort of the career opportunities that they're going to prevail for themselves. And then finally, some other issues I think around thinking about your own leadership style. So thinking about what's your leadership style, which is going to get the best out of them, and thinking very carefully about how you manage different people within your leadership team. And then also I think what's interesting as well is this issue of reporting lines. So thinking about your shared service, thinking about what reporting lines are optimal for me as a shared service organisation in terms of who I'm reporting to into the rest of the organisation. That's particularly important from a GBS perspective. There's a very topical debate at the moment around who GBS reports into. Is it CFOs? Is it CIOs? Is it COOs, etc.? And I think that's really important in terms of the level of influence that a shared service centre can have. So, in terms of tips, I mean, I think sort of some of these will be very familiar, but it's obvious things around regular profiling of your leadership team to understand what the capability equation is and what the gaps are. Things like succession planning, doing that regularly, and even taking a slightly longer term view and looking at workforce planning, which is really around the right people, the right skills, the right time, the right place, and preferably for the right cost. Talent programs, again, I think really, particularly mature shared service centres now have got to be, if they've not already started to look at formal talent programs. And this idea of rotation, which I know more and more organisations are looking at. I mean, certainly from a from a finance perspective, we are seeing more businesses look at shared services and GBS operations as a potential training ground for future CFOs. So that mobility and that rotation in and out of the business is great for a whole variety of reasons, and it brings a huge amount of capability, I think, to the leadership team, and of course offers people individual opportunities. Hybrid roles is an interesting one. So there are some organisations I know of that have created quite senior roles that essentially bridge between the shared service operation and the retained organisation, and that's interesting from a couple of perspectives. So that's really about, I guess, sort of giving those senior people, I guess, sort of one foot in both camps to sort of bridge those relationships and strengthen those ties. But I think it's also about visibility and connectivity between, for the rest of the shared service workforce, in terms of seeing that people have those relationships and those responsibilities. So I think that's quite an interesting idea. And then other things, 360-degree feedback, so constantly gauging the level of engagement and leadership engagement that the rest of the workforce have. Obvious things, walking the floor, making sure the leadership team are always visible and the workforce consistently can see them. And also, pushing them to consistently champion what shared services. It's not always on. The reality is, shared services is not always on the radar of the whole organisation because it has multiple priorities. So if you have a team which consistently champions what shared services brings, the values in its culture and what it does for the business, then I think that is important. And then, of course, making sure you've got the right sort of leadership opportunities in place to develop the sort of leadership competencies that you need in your team. So that's the leadership team, and I think, to be honest, a lot of that applies for the broader shared service workforce. And again, the reality is that the quality of everyone in shared services is absolutely fundamental to its success. And for me, there are probably three things. Firstly, and you mentioned it before, it's around engagement. So making sure, above anything else, that you have a workforce which is engaged, making sure they've got the right skills and the right capabilities, and also, of course, giving them the right sorts of career opportunities. They are, in reality, they are the operational face of shared services to the business, and they're a significant knowledge resource. They are the workforce of a significant talent pool as well. And we all know that the poor relationships with the shared service teams leads to poor engagement, which has a huge amount of cost in terms of money, in terms of time, in terms of loss of tacit knowledge in the business, and therefore, you know, you're gonna end up with pretty much suboptimal return on investment. So it makes pretty obvious sense that these people have got to be engaged, they've got to be motivated, they've got to be given the opportunities that that they deserve. So I think, again, a few fundamental questions to reflect on when thinking about your shared service employees, or things like, where are the critical roles, what are the critical skills that I need in terms of where I'm trying to take my shared service operation. You know, how do I drive the right culture in my people? You know, how do I encourage and cultivate the right sorts of behaviours? What's my plan for developing, you know, talent? What sort of, you know, where do these people want to go? What are their aspirations? What career opportunities can I give them? Both I guess in the shared service environment, and also linking into the retained organisation. Critically, what's the level of engagement? You know, how brought in are they to what we're trying to achieve, and the vision here? And I guess there's some other questions around reward structures and those sorts of issues in terms of being able to retain and attract people. So if I think about sort of, you know, the broader shared service team, well, yeah, I mean, take your pick. There's just so many things that the organisations can do here, from sort of, you know, regular surveys to track engagement, things around succession planning, making sure you consistently embed and reinforce the culture across the workforce. Competency frameworks, I think, are really important. So what are the key roles, the key skills, the key capabilities, the key behaviours that you're going to need across all your different teams? We touched on talent programs before, which I think, you know, again, we see more and more shared services looking to sort of drive and adopt these talent programs to bring talent up and through. Obviously, rotation, so trying to get sort of a blended experience across your shared service operation. And again, I think particularly important in a GBS environment where you're working cross-functionally. It's like coaching and mentoring, I think, are becoming more popular. And you know, we're certainly seeing the conversations that we're having with shared service leaders. They seem to be putting, or certainly some businesses seem to be putting a lot more effort into coaching and mentoring, which I think is great, and also gives another engagement point for the leadership team as well. So I think that's a good thing to do, and I guess aligned to that, this idea of career conversations. So being very transparent and clear with people about, you know, where do you want your career to go in the shared service environment. I think there is always a risk, if I'm brutally honest, in shared services about the concern around limitations in terms of where you can take your career. But we all know that the sort of the processes that are coming in scope now tend to be broader. There is more bandwidth to many shared service careers. So it should actually really be positioned as a great place to have a career. And I think that's another thing that the leadership team can reinforce. And then other things, really, you know, I mean, again, some of these are pretty obvious, but making sure your talent pipeline goes right the way through to things like local universities, you know, championing, you know, profiling good people within the shared service environment, making sure you've got a strong learning curricula, sort of developing both the technical competencies and skills that you need, as well as, I guess, what I call the behavioural capabilities. And then, you know, good reward strategies, you know, benchmarking them, understanding sort of how they're comparing to your competitors, and then sort of, I'm bound to say, I guess, sort of, you know, this idea of professional qualification, which, you know, is really about sort of giving people sort of, you know, the right sort of career opportunities. So there's lots in there. I know it's quite, you know, a lot of shared services are doing some of these things already. But I think it's something that you just need to consistently monitor and watch all the time. It slips away easily if you don't keep on top of it.
Thank you, Jamie. So let's just move to a conclusion, and then let's take your questions, please. So a shared services organisation and a GBS organisation, ultimately it's a people-based organisation. So what you're finding there is the importance of the relationship really gluing you to your customers, and also just making sure that the relationship that you've got with your shared services organisation is going to be largely based on the people that you've got in your shared services operations. So this is why I think there's such a keen kind of focus on the talent that you've got within shared services today. And point number 2, what you're delivering to your business today can only be described as a people-based business. And of course, there's technology in there. Of course, there's process, but in order to use the technology, there needs to be training and education, and in order to follow the process, again, training and education and communication, and that comes back to obviously the people part of the organisation and the communication that comes from them and the relationship that they've got with you. And point number 3, it's very important to understand that this is so nuanced based, and I think understanding the nuances that can really tip the difference between a positive relationship and a negative relationship are really key. And so much of it just comes from asking questions, listening to the answers, providing an attitude that is problem solving, making sure that it's clear that you understand where your customer is coming from, where they want to be, building a reputation and building a trust and a credibility. I remember, it is quite interesting because I think a lot of shared services now is actually, and although people don't want to use the word, it's actually about selling stuff. It's about selling the vision, selling the proposition of shared services within the business. And I remember a very successful salesperson saying to me once that you only buy from salespeople that you like. So building that relationship with your customers in order for the shared services to be more successful, and therein for the company to be more successful, for the shared services to build its scope, to take on new functions, take on new countries, become a GBS. This is all about really the business relinquishing much more of what they're doing and you taking on much more. And so there has to be credibility, there has to be likability, there has to be trust, and you have to have a strong reputation. So mapping out each relationship. So this is actually basically being clear of all the relationship points that you've got from your shared service, from you as a shared services leader, from the shared services organisation, just mapping out all those different relationships and just being really, really clear as to what the strengths and weaknesses are, what your plans are in place to bolster each of the relationships. And it takes you away from being actually quite task-oriented to focusing on the output, which ultimately is about the relationship. So
yeah, I think just to reinforce that, Susie, as well, I think understandably, in a shared service environment, we're always concerned around meeting our SLAs and sort of delivering operationally what we're expected to do. But the point we mentioned before around your SLAs being great, but actually the experience of the customer particularly not being great, that's really detrimental to the longevity of a shared service operation. And I think particularly this idea about, this is why culture and vision and people and relationships matter, because you can deliver on a process, but when you're talking about engaging the business, when you're talking about ensuring, having a real service-orientated approach to the relationship, that is about culture, it is about behaviour, and of course it's about great relationships. So I think sort of, we just always have to be mindful, we can never let that slip from our vision, shall we say.
Absolutely. So good. All right, well, look, I hope that was useful for you. We're now moving into questions. So we do have about 10 minutes for Q&A, or just shy of. So there's the first question that came through is, what is the difference between users and customers? And apologies if this wasn't clearly articulated. So how it's commonly kind of considered is that a customer within shared services is the group of people that end up actually paying the bill. And this is on the premise that the shared services charges for its services, and most do. Different charging mechanisms are available, but most shared services charge for their services. and that the individuals that procure those services are indeed the customers. They will inevitably be a very senior a person within the organisation. The users are the people that somehow have a user-based relationship with the shared services. So it could be anybody that uses SAP. You might have, 800 or 8,000 or more people using SAP. They could be considered as a user, that somehow they liaise with the shared services organisation. They have a touch point with the organisation. It could be your sales team who go out and have to put together their T&E expenses to be submitted. These are people in your organisation who somehow, their behaviour has an impact on how efficient you can be. So to get them on side is key, because you want a salesperson completing their T&E form in the compliant way so that you don't have to do rework, and in a compliant way so that you can go and reclaim all the VAT that you can. So so with the users, it's much more about educating them on what they need to do to be compliant in the process. So as far as the second question, which I'm going to put to Jamie, so one user is asking whether we've seen any sort of a trend in the shared services space as in a move towards or out of shared services, and a move towards particular geos. Jamie?
Yeah, it's a great question, Susie. Well, I think sort of, the stats, look at the sort of Fortune 500, I think sort of 70–80% of those organisations now have got some sort of shared service or outsourcing arrangement in place, certainly for finance. And I think, the reality is, shared services has delivered on so many fronts. It has, of course, delivered on the cost front. It's delivered on the efficiency front. It's delivered on, sort of scalability. It's delivered on lots and lots of different fronts, I think, for the organisation. So, it's been a success story. In terms of what we see in trends moving forward, I'd point to a few really. I mean, we've already touched on GBS. For some of the very largest organisations, I think Global Business Services potentially has opportunities going forward. Technology, I think, is an interesting trend or area of possible advancement. I think it's perhaps not been as it's not delivered all of its promise, shall we say, in a shared service environment today. But I think sort of there is more talk about more automation. There's more talk about things like robotics, and I use the term very carefully. But I think sort of the technology angle is potentially one trend that we might see more of in the future. And I guess things like, because we've been on this journey where we've moved from this primary focused around cost and more towards value, then I think organisations are becoming much more savvy about particular locations, for example. And certainly sort of that balance between sort of whether it's around cost or whether it's around infrastructure or whether it's around capability, I think that balance is shifting. Because I know the question was sort of directed particularly around geographic trends. So I wouldn't particularly point out any sort of specific sort of parts of the world where we could say, well, it's definitely all going to be there or it's going to be there. I think different locations have different sort of pros and cons, but definitely that cost, capability, infrastructure, all those different things I think are playing a much more equal share in why businesses choose to go to certain locations.
A question that's come through, often employees from the business do not want to work with the Shared Services Centre, and staff from the Shared Services Centre do not find entry into the business after a career in shared services. So this is about career moves.
Yeah.
Any practical tips on how to crack the barriers?
Well, I think part of the problem first is perceptions around this old perception around sort of shared service being sort of the back office function and sort of the business being sort of the more value added part of the organisation. So I think it starts with the stuff that we talked about before in terms of vision, in terms of culture, and getting the shared services on an equal footing and making it be seen as a value partner. So you need that culture in place to truly to truly make it work. I also talked about sort of hybrid leadership roles before, and I think they can help facilitate some of that as well, where people have responsibilities within the remit of their role, both from a retained perspective, but also from a shared service perspective as well. So putting people in place at a reasonably senior level who can, if you like, facilitate some of those movements, I think is certainly something to look at.
I think a lot of it does stem from the reputation, as you talked about there, and the perception that the shared services organisation does have. And I think this is the term branding of your shared services is coming up more and more, to make sure that your shared services as an entity, the brand is strong and people want to be associated with it, and they are excited about it, and they do want to find out more about it. And so we're not just talking about having a cool logo and a fantastic little strapline. We're talking about having, because your brand is really much more about having a strong culture and a strong spirit and a strong energy and a strong vision and a strong purpose. And that comes down to making sure that everybody in your shared service organisation absolutely understands what their purpose is, and that they are aligned in their thinking. So putting huge amounts of time and putting that as a priority, I think, is really going to serve you.
Yeah, and I think certainly my expertise falls primarily into the finance area. But if I think about leadership development in finance, the reality is for the most mature large businesses now that have been operating shared services for some time, a lot of what is core to finance happens in a shared service environment. So when you're looking to develop your future pipeline of finance leaders, you've really got to be thinking about, can I afford as a business not to have people at least spending some time in that and rotating through? And I think it works. I think it works both ways, to be honest. So I think, and having that visibility and seeing that happening, it just becomes embedded in the culture then. So I think I'm quite hopeful about more mobility, actually.
Okay, let's move on. A couple more questions here. Jamie, I'll put this to you. What is the role of the CEO for shared services success?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think let's take global business services as a good example, because there are some in this space that actually think global business services should potentially be led by the CEO. The first thing is to make sure that shared services is on the CEO's radar. That's absolutely that's the fundamental building block. What you really want from a CEO is for them to understand what you do, and you want them to champion what you do. I think what we see, and again thinking from a finance perspective, you think some of the basic stuff that happens from a finance function perspective, when it all works very well, when the business is doing well, it's sort of just accepted that it happens. And then when the business is sort of struggling or it's in trouble, then sometimes some of that core stuff that just routinely happens becomes more visible and becomes a greater focus. So I think what you've got to think about is, wherever we are in the business cycle, how do we consistently get what we do, and how do we put that onto the board? How do we get that visibility? And I think if you can find a CEO that understands what you do, understands what your vision is, then I think their role really is just to pretty much promote what you do,
support it, and make sure that they don't undermine it. I think the why is also really important. So if the CEO came to you and said, why are you guys in existence? And you can cohesively respond to that in a really powerful way, which makes the CEO realize that you are absolutely invaluable to him or her, and will make sure that the CEO's objectives as far as the company development is concerned will be met sooner rather than later, and in a more elegant way, then they are going to spend time with you, support you. They're going to have their soft campaign to make sure that nobody in the business undermines you. So I think that's, again, in an ideal world, the CEO is going to support you, but have your why response ready.
And I think those boxes have been ticked, and we know what the answers are, because we're going to give you lower cost, because we're going to drive process improvement, because we're going to drive standardization, because we're going to give you a better control business. I mean, there are so many reasons why. The question is answered, really.
Well, and it absolutely is, and I think it comes down to positioning. I mean, saying to a CEO, well, we're in existence because you want to buy a chocolate company in Brazil, and you want to make sure that you don't lose out to your competitor, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing the things that we're doing, because that's what your aim is for the next 6 to 12 months. So having those whys and associating it with their kind of key objectives, I think is really, really key. But we are unfortunately nearly out of time. I think we have time for one more. So let's zero in on this one. How do we identify the influencer and build a strengthened relationship or strong relationship with them? This comes. Some shared services organisations may have been guilty in the past and even now of being a little bit too insular. Aligning with the business is a great, or endeavouring to align with the business is a great excuse to get out there and meet the business leaders, meet all of your customers, meet your super users, and then find and connect with the influencers. And by finding and connecting with the influencers, that is actually just asking the leaders in each of the business lines or each of your customers, who has the big voice in this part of the business? Who do people go to? Who do people listen to? And getting their contact details and connecting with them and spending time with them and educating them and asking them if they would be okay to be an influencer. And sometimes they'll say no, but sometimes they'll be very much on board. Good. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and attention. We hope that was useful for you, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Goodbye.